gospel for this morning is read from the 17th chapter of Luke's gospel.
Glory to you, Lord.
On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he approached the village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean, but the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. I want you to know that when I was that age, I did exactly the same thing. I escaped my mother's grasp and wandered to church as I wished. And look where it got me. So that was going to be a pastor. Remember that I said that, and that might either be very comforting to you or very frightening. So just curious, how many of you would like to have this $20 bill? Well, I see that a good number of your hands went up. And my suspicion is that if your hand didn't go up, it probably didn't go up for one of two reasons. Number one, you're highly suspicious. You know, you've been around long enough to know that nothing in life is free. There's got to be a catch. Or two, your hand didn't go up because you've learned from first-hand experience that when you raise your hand in church, that can be dangerous. You raise your hand, and next thing you know, you're the chair of the property committee. But what if there were no conditions, no catches, and no fine print? I ask again, how many of you would like to have this $20 bill? Okay. How many of you would like to have this $20 bill now? All right, if I throw it away, how many of you would like to have that $20 bill? How many of you would like to have that $20 bill now? Well, the reality is most of us would still like to have that $20 bill, right? Because crumpling it, throwing it away, stomping on it has not changed its value even by 1 cent. It's still worth 20 bucks. So often we as God's people get crumpled and we get stomped on and we get tossed aside by situations and circumstances in life, by other people sometimes even by the decisions that we ourselves make. And if it gets bad enough, we start thinking that we've lost value or somehow we're not worth much. But here's the good news of our Christian faith. When God so wonderfully made you, God stepped back and said, "Oh, it is good." And when God said those words, nothing in all creation can ever change them. Nothing can ever change the goodness that God created in you, no matter what has happened to you, no matter what is happening now, no matter what will ever happen to you. You can never, ever lose your value or worth. In the eyes of God, you will always be loved and of infinite value, and don't ever forget that. Today's gospel story is about 10 lepers who asked Jesus to heal them. Now, a little perspective on the story might help us understand the depth and the beauty of this story. In the time of Jesus, skin diseases were what everybody feared. Elephantiasis was what the scriptures in the original language call. It was one of the most hideous and horrible things that could happen to a person, not because it made a person die, but because it made a person live with horrendous suffering. Greeks called it elephant skin. The Persians called it the white disease. Luke's gospel calls it leprosy. It began as an infection, and soon the infected person's skin got flaky and scaly. Then came pain, a whole lot of pain. After the skin turned white, a bunch of nasty-looking sores appeared. Feeling was lost in parts of the body that were affected, and soon those parts started dropping off. Fingers, toes, hands, even sometimes parts of your arms and legs. Eventually, the person was left with stumps that might or might not get infected themselves. And worst of all, this whole process that I described, from the scaly skin to the stumps, could last as much as 30 years. Now, can you imagine that? 30 years. Having to live with that kind of disease for that long. I just say, thank heaven that leprosy is not something that we have to worry about these days, at least not here. And furthermore, I thank God that a lot of the terrible diseases that have plagued humanity over the centuries, we don't have to deal with anymore because of the wonders of modern medicine. Thank God. But in Jesus' time, leprosy was the big bad ogre. And it was everywhere. If you had it, you were required by law to stay completely isolated, away from everybody, even your family, not only because you were highly contagious, but also, just to be quite blunt about it, you stunk to high heaven. Nobody wanted to be around you. So you were forced to live in a colony with other people who had these skin diseases, and if anybody came within 50 yards of you by law, you had to call out at the top of your lungs, "Unclean! Unclean!" so that people would know that they should stay away. Lepers were less than human. They had no value. $20 bills that no one wanted. They were the ones that you spent your days and nights praying, dear God, please don't let me be like that person, the leper. So it should come as no surprise then that people who had leprosy often said that it would be far better to die than to go on living with that disease. So I think you get the picture, maybe all too graphically. Elephantiasis, or elephant skin, or the white disease, or leprosy. Something nobody wanted for even 10 minutes, let alone 30 years. But remember, a $20 bill, crumpled and stomped on and thrown away, is still worth 20 bucks. So when Jesus came upon a bunch of lepers that day, he saw their true worth. He alone saw people. He saw loved family members. He saw children of God. And we can only imagine the emotions and feelings that he stirred up in them as he came closer. St. Luke records it this way. Jesus was going into a village. 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Well, no kidding. They must have called out with a loud voice. They were probably screaming at the top of their lungs. Here was the only person in all of creation who could take away their suffering in an instant. They must have yelled for all they were worth, "Jesus, please don't pass us by. Please stop. Please help us. Please heal us," just hoping that he would notice and tend to them. And he did notice, and he did tend to them. He made the impossible happen. Incredibly, he took this hideous disease away, and we can only imagine how excited and amazed and overwhelmed they must have been. But here's the part of the story that always stuns me and baffles me no matter how many times I read the story no matter how many times I preach on it. Only one person returned to say thank you. One out of 10. Every time I hear that, the first thing I think is, there's no way, that can't be true. If I were there, if I were one of those people with leprosy and Jesus healed me, I would go sprinting back to Jesus to tell him thank you, to tell him how much I appreciate what he'd done. I'd be tearful about it. I'd certainly be the one to go back, wouldn't I? God has been so good to us, you know it and I know it. Yes, we've all had some bad things happen in life, and many of us have bad things happening right now. But when it's all said and done, as you look at the whole picture of your life, don't you have to agree that God has been very, very good? And yet a recent study by Rasmussen Reports said that not even half of Christians in this country, these are Christians in this country, not even half, say that they talk to God regularly. 18% of Christians say they never talk to God. They say they're too busy. They say they just keep forgetting. For whatever reason, they don't talk to God. Evangelical Christians do a whole lot better job of talking to God than we Lutherans. 2/3 of them pray to God daily, while Lutherans say that about 50% of us say that we pray regularly. But at least we've got the Catholics beat. The Catholics, 40% of Catholics say they pray regularly. Women are better than men, so this would be time women that you want to elbow your husband. 53 to 40% women pray more than men. If you're Republican, you've got the Democrats beat by 10%. 57% to 47%. If you're not part of either party, then you're part of a group where only 1 out of 3 people pray regularly. People of color pray far more frequently than those of us who are Caucasian. And older Americans are much more likely to pray than young adults by a huge margin. And I'm guessing that's because the older we get, the more acutely aware we become of our mortality, and that is always motivation to turn to God for help. The bottom line is, on average, just short of half the people in this country who call themselves Christian pray regularly, which isn't bad. It's certainly a lot better than 10%, the 10% of the lepers who returned to thank Jesus. And yet, even half is pretty dismal, isn't it? Shouldn't we all, 100% of us, be grateful for what God has done? Shouldn't it be part of the very fabric of our being to regularly turn to God in thanks and prayer? Each and every day, Jesus is doing something wonderful in your life. Now, you may not always see it, you may not always recognize it, you may not always feel it, but I promise you, God is at work in and around and through you even now, today. If nothing else, you get to breathe. Your heart gets to beat. You get to enjoy the beauty of God's creation in this most beautiful part of the planet. You've got people who love you. You've been given the very sacred gift of life itself, and it is a sacred gift. Some of the things that we've all done in life, dumb things, mistakes, foolish decisions, regretful choices, we all have them. And many of us continually beat ourselves up for them. We just can't let go of it. Decreasing our value, we imagine. But you know what? God has forgiven. And God's opinion of you has never changed. Remember how I said at the beginning, when God formed you and looked at you and stood back and said, "It is good." That's how God felt then, and it's how God feels now, regardless of anything that's happened in your life. You are loved more than you can possibly know. You are and always will be of infinitely more value than a crisp new bill of any denomination. And if that's true, and it is, then shouldn't it affect and influence every word that comes out of your mouth and every action you take? Being a person of faith means beginning, ending, and living each day first and foremost with gratitude and awe for what God has done and what God is doing in your life. It means making a commitment to not be like the 9 who didn't return, but rather to be like the one who did. Returning again and again and again and again and again to simply say a heartfelt thank you to Jesus for his willingness to go to the cross for you, so that no kind of death will ever be able to have the final say in your life, ever. $20 will always be $20, no matter how clean, no matter how crumpled, no matter how stomped on. And you will always be loved and treasured and cared for by God. That's the gospel in a nutshell. And now that gospel is in your hands. To share that good news. To be the one who regularly give thanks for it, instead of being like the other 9 who never even thought of saying thank you. If you live consistently, day after day, with that kind of gratitude, imagine what a difference it might make in the lives of those who encounter you each day, but even more importantly, imagine the difference it might make in you. Amen. Hymn number 8.